Hello, good morning, folks, or wherever you are in the world. I'm delighted to have Laurie Marsden with us, who's going to be talking about her career as a model out of New York, went to France, all over the world with some of the biggest names, and there is overlap with some of the names we focused on this channel, including Jean-Luc Brunel and Gerard. How do I pronounce Gerard's last name?
Gerald Marie.
That's
Gerald
him.
Marie. Mm-hmm,
Yeah,
mm-hmm. In fact, you had a story on him back about 5 years ago, and that's when I found you. So I had Googled his name, and your podcast. You were one of the first podcasters to actually talk about him. So I started following you all the way back then. So I'm just thrilled to be on and talk about the modeling industry and this sort of system that's been developing, I think, over decades and maybe even perfected in the last few to take people and transport them, as you say, Shaun.
Yeah, and if we've got time, we're also going to talk about Virginia's book. Both of us are more than halfway through it.
Yeah, yeah,
It's absolutely hit me in the guts, especially the stuff
yeah,
alleged about her father and Uncle Forrest. But
yeah,
we'll get to that. Yeah, let's
yeah, yeah.
let's go back first and go over your story from the very beginning.
Okay,
And
sure.
you have sent us some photos as well
Hmm.
to detail this journey. And I
Hmm.
think the
Sure.
first one is this old school black and white picture. Let me get it up. And so who's this gentleman?
Uh, oh, so that's my father, right? That's my father, and he was just an incredible man. In fact, I was born in a small town near Buffalo, New York, and raised there. And it was a pretty regular childhood, I guess. We didn't have a lot of money, but we made our way. My mom was a nurse, and my dad was a pump and tank mechanic for Atlantic Richfield. And this is a photo of him from World War II. He was in the Air Force. He's one of the men in my life that really helped me to understand what men are like in the sort of male way. He was a huge influence on me. He was very respectful, asked me to help him out with things. And, that relationship that you have with your primary caregivers really is so important. I know Lisa Phillips was on, she's an Epstein survivor, and she was on talking to an interviewer about a month ago. And she said that Epstein had actually asked her about her relationship with her father and it was part of his grooming process to see what the relationship was, because if you didn't get a positive reinforcement, or in some other way, you had troubled relationships with your dad, it was easier for him to manipulate them and become a father figure, or it just sort of flagged these women, I believe, to him to be easier to do things to. So I feel like that relationship really helped, that I had that solid sort of mirroring by my dad. I did feel respected by him. So when I went out in the world, I sort of knew a little bit more how to manage men, and I had that sense that I was worthy of respect, and that's just so important. So yeah, that was he was a big part of my early childhood, and he was a fantastic father. Unfortunately, he's been gone now for it's decades and decades, 30 some years. Yeah, I died very young at 67.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we see from the book that Virginia's just released about. She confides in Maxwell and Jeffrey the trauma of what's happened in her past with her father and Uncle Forrest, and then she realizes they're just going to weaponize that against her, but it's too late. Yeah.
Exactly. And I see this, I mean, I'm a psychotherapist now, and I see this with my clients that come to see me. They, if they've had difficulties with their parents, and particularly women with their fathers, that they struggle, and they tend to attract also these very narcissistic types. So, yeah, I do feel that really worked in my favor, because I entered into this world that I was really not prepared for. I was very young. I was 18 when I moved to New York, and it was, it was a lot for me to take in. I was very naive. I mean, we were a Catholic family, so fairly conservative. There's this really good story of when my dad was going off to war in World War II. He was the youngest of 8, and he had a sister who was a nun. And she said to him, she said, "I'm going to give you this rosary, and I'm going to pray for you. And if God wants to take you, I'm going to pray that he takes me, because I'm more prepared." And so he went off to war. He saw hand-to-hand combat. He was in the Pacific, but he was, on an airplane one day, and he was scouting. He was looking out for enemy aircraft, and a friend of his was on the other side of the airplane. And the friend said, "Oh, my neck's getting a bit sore. Like, maybe we'll switch sides." And they switched sides. And a couple of minutes later, they came under enemy fire, and that man was killed instead of my dad. And I know, right? And then meanwhile, back in Buffalo, New York, my aunt, who was a nun who I never met, she developed pneumonia, and she died 2 months before penicillin was released to the public, because penicillin was kept for the troops and for the war effort, and it wasn't released to the public. So there's that's sort of like this faith that I was raised in, and I think that also helped me as I was moving through my career.
Well, let's talk about how you got the scholarship into modeling. I'll put one of your photos up.
Okay, sure. So that's when I first got to New York, that one. But I went in, entered a contest in the mall. There was just a box where you put your name in. I won a scholarship to John Robert Powers Modeling School, and I ended up going. I was there for like 9 months, and then they asked me if I wanted to go to New York City to a modeling convention, and I had just done it. I wasn't like the most confident young girl. I was 15 when I went to this modeling school. I just didn't really think that I could model, and but I ended up going to the convention. I didn't win anything, like any of the competitions, but I did get to meet a couple agents, and one of them offered me a contract. And my parents, immediately said, "There's no way, you're not going to go." And so they were very much against it. They wanted me to, go to university and do something, something sort of normal, if you will. They didn't understand the whole industry, and not that I did either, but I really felt like I wanted to get away and sort of find myself. And so anyway, I ended up going to university for a year. As I was young, I was like I was 17 when I got the first offer. So I went back to New York, and I got and interviewed with some other agents that I had set up with myself and sort of this agent in Buffalo. And I got an even better offer. So the day after my last final exams, I moved to New York, and I started modeling. So this photo was one of the first things they do when you arrive in New York City is, all the photos that you had from your hometowns that get just, tossed away. And you have to do a photo shoot with the New York photographers. And Jacques and Dominique Silverstein were like the go-to photographers. They did all the new girls. And I think that my agent, which was named Legends at the time, it was the original IMG models. And they expected like this very wholesome sort of, because I came in, I was all very smiley when they first met me. And then, these French photographers, they did my hair like that. And, and then this leopard print that I was put in. And of course they were, saying, "Okay, be sexy, Laurie," and I'm like, I'm 18, I'm a virgin. I don't know what sexy is. Anyway, we did the photos, and then my agent saw them, and they were like, "Oh, okay." So suddenly I wasn't like necessarily just going to be a fresh-faced catalog girl, but they said, that I would probably go and do editorial, which means working for the magazines. So, and in order to do that, I was going to go to Europe, because that's how it worked. Like the girls who were sort of flagged to do that, they would go to Europe. And Milan was the first stop for most models, because the magazines there were always interested in new faces, and they were very very, on the lookout for the next new girl and new look. So, yeah, I met some scouts while I was in New York, and I was in New York for about 3 months developing my New York portfolio, and then I was sent to Milan. And that photo is from Grazia magazine in Milan that you have up now.
So how did you find Milan then?
So Shaun, Milan was a very interesting place, right? So, I arrived and, made my way to the agency. They sort of sent me out straight away. The Italians were lovely, but it was the industry at that time, it was just full of playboys. And they put me up in a residence called Residence Clotilde, and the playboys would all just wait outside, and they were anywhere from in their 20s to in their 70s, and they were Italian men that just wanted to date models. And they'd be at agency dinners that we'd go to. They'd be at the restaurants. Like it was almost like a small little community, if you will, in Milan. And Milan is the fashion hub of Italy. It's not Rome like a lot of people think. So, they were just everywhere. And that's in Milan is where I first got a taste of, how I might not be safe because I was roofied.
No.
Yes. I was roofied. I was 18, and I didn't even know what being roofied was. I didn't think that was something people did. Again, I have this very sort of conservative background. I'm like trying to deal with all these people, and I'm in a foreign country. I don't speak the language, but we, the models used to all hang out together, and we went to a club one night called Amnesia, and I was with some friends, and there was this model from Kentucky. I remember her very clearly, and she called a couple of these younger playboys over. She knew one of them, and she's like, "Oh, how you going, blah, blah, blah." And they were all started talking, and I thought, all right, well, they're sort of age appropriate. And one of them said, "Would you like a drink?" And I said, "Sure." So I had the drink, and then that's the last thing I remember. I woke up in some strange man's apartment on sort of like a fold-out couch, and I just remember being really upset, and my head was killing me, and I just looked down and I saw that I still had like my stockings and my boots on. I had this like shortish dress, and I thought, okay, well, that's a good sign, because I know I'm obviously, not where I should be, and God only knows what has happened here. I ended up getting up, and there was someone there, and it's like, "Oh, go." He was like talking in Italian, and suddenly couldn't talk English. And I remember, I just left, and I made my way back, and I had found out what had happened. It had been a big scene at the nightclub, because there was someone that I knew from Buffalo, someone who had gone to that John Robert Powers modeling school, who also happened to be in Murray. And he had seen me sort of in the clutches of these men. And so he ended up getting in a fight, a little fisticuffs, with them. And the police were called, and it ended up being it was a very big thing. So I think with the police and everything, that was another reason that I was kind of, unscathed. But it did wake me up to the fact that the world is not always safe. And it was a good lesson for me to, just be careful. But, sometimes no matter what you do, you're not necessarily going to be safe. No matter what you try, sometimes, there's just a predator around the corner.
Yeah. So was your next destination, was it Paris?
Yeah, so I did. Yeah, I did fairly well in Milan. I worked for the Vogues, a couple of the Vogues in Grazia and Lei, and then I went back to my home agent in New York for Christmas, and I went back to Milan, and they didn't seem, they didn't seem really that interested when I got back. And the scout who had originally found me said in New York, said, "Look, it's just not busy this time of year," but he said, "Why don't you go to Paris? And I think you do really well in Paris. And there's this great agent there called Gerald Marie. I will Xerox your photos to him, and you can, get you a train ticket, and you can go." So I thought, all right, I mean, my mother agent in New York was always sort of keeping tabs on me, which I think also helped and sort of kept me a little bit more protected too. Like some girls who just go over to Europe because they meet the European agents, I don't think they're as protected. Like having a New York agent, I think really helped as well. But anyway, so I got on the train and I knew that I had to impress Gerald because even though he'd agreed to sort of take me on or see me, it wasn't 100%. And I remember I prepared. I went in early to the agency early in the morning and he just looked at me and, he sort of smiled and I thought, okay, this is good. I'm in. And I was really excited because Gerald Marie was with Paris Planning at the time. It was a very big agency. It was known as one of the best agents there was. And I was happy to be with him. I had just started running out of money at that point. So I asked him for a bit of an advance and he gave me almost 10 times what I asked him, walked me to the accountant and was like, here you go. And he was like, you're going to do really well in Paris. And in fact, I did. I started very strong in Paris. This photo is from a Germain Montet cosmetic campaign. I shot with Steven Silverstein, who's just an amazing photographer. He and I've reconnected recently. And I did a big Elegance shampoo for Greece. So they flew me to Athens and I did, billboards and TV commercial and other kinds of print. And that was 5 days in Athens. And then Elle Magazine was having me in and doing all these fittings and they had me on hold for all of these trips. So, originally when I got to Paris, things were going really well. And then Gerald invited me to a party. And at first I was really, I was very happy to go. It was at his house, but it was sort of I felt like I was getting into the inner sanctum of the agency, that everything was just going super well and not everybody was invited. But, I arrived at the party and there was a nice group of people and he and I ended up speaking for quite a while and he was very generous and he, was talking about how to present myself in a French way. And I said, look, I really want to do really well here. And he said, really well? I'm not talking about doing really well. He said, Laurie, I'm going to make you a star. He said, you have everything it takes. You have, he's going, you have your hair, your skin, your body, it's like, I'm going to do this for you. And I was just, I was 19 at the time. And as I turned 19 in Milan, and I was just like, wow, I was so excited. It was sort of like everything I had wanted to hear in my career. And I believed him too, because it's like I had started out very strong and I thought, oh, this is great. So I said, look, and I turned around, I could see that the party was thinning out. And I said, I'm going to get going. I'm just going to use the loo or the bathroom. And he pointed down the hall and said, it's just down there. So I went, and as soon as I walked back out into the hallway, there was a man there. Then I was just immediately body checked into another room through a door, and there was a bed right there, and I was just kind of thrown on the bed, and this man was on top of me. It was so fast, and I was so shocked. So I just all of a sudden I realized it was him. It was Gerald. And he started telling me what he was going to do to me. And I was immediately telling him no. I was trying to just, stop, come on, Gerald, no. And then it got more intense. And he was a big man. He was muscular, I should say. He used to be a dancer. So I was no match for him physically, really. And I was underneath him, and it was, it was really a fight for my life.
Is this picture him on the screen?
Yeah. So this is him, and he's pushing his baby. So it's, he had a baby and he was married to another model, an Australian model. So this was so out of what I thought would ever happen, because there was no, flirting, or there was no, I thought he was, a very good agent married with a child, married to another model and with a child. But But he had other ideas in mind. So, I was essayed, and he was very close to R-ing me. And I just had this last sort of burst of energy, just almost before I gave up. And somehow I managed to roll him. And suddenly I was on top, and I sprung off of him. And I don't know who was more surprised, him or me, but I sprung off of him. And then I just ran out of there. And I was really concerned. The next day was like a Sunday. I was like thinking, oh, what's going to happen? I'm like, oh, he's going to be fine. Like, I'm sure he's, doesn't always get his way, or some women have said no to him before, and I was like screaming no. It was really a fight that we had. It was very physical, trying to get out of there, and I was very fortunate that I did. But in any case, so I went into the agency the next working day, and I had a appointment with a photographer, and he saw me, and he looked at me, and his eyes just went black. And he asked for my chart, and he took it. So a chart just was basically your agenda. It had like your bookings and things on it. And he said, I'm going to call Elle Magazine. And he said it so I could hear. And I'm like looking and nervous, and he gets on the phone with Elle Magazine, and he's speaking in French. And then he just clicks the phone, and he looks at me, and he said, they're canceled. And I said, what's canceled? And he said, your Elle bookings. And I said, well, which one? And he said, all of them. So Elle Magazine was really one of the best fashion magazines that there was, particularly at the time in the 80s. It was, like up there with Vogue and Bazaar. And if you did a trip with them, it would have immediately shot you into a different category of model, right? So, he just sabotaged my career, and it was also overwhelming. Like, you have to think, Shaun, too, I'm still like a teenager, like 19 years old, right? And one minute, he's telling me he's going to make me a star, and the next minute he's sabotaging my career. And I just started crying, and one of the bookers came up, and she sat with me, and she said, look, you should maybe go to Germany, because there's an agent there, Crystal Flath. She's a woman. She's got all these clients interested in you, and why don't you go and just get out of Paris for a while? And I was just so distraught. So I agreed. I just thought, I have to get out of here. And, but, looking back now, I go, well, why would they send me off when I had been doing so well? But, I think that, it was just because I think the bookers knew that whatever had happened between Gerald and me, that I wasn't going to be pushed anymore. So I did go. And then, I did come back to France, though, because I was living in a beautiful apartment with my roommate. So I was lucky that I never really stayed in a model's apartment, because I hear lots of stories about them and how cramped they are and crowded, and how, they're overcharged, and models just get big bills from staying in them. So I was lucky I didn't have that. But I ended up coming back to Paris, and after a few weeks, and Gerald just sort of ignored me and stayed away from me. And I worked with the other agents there.
Is this around the time you met this guy, Roman Polanski?
Yeah, that's him. Oh, wow, look at that. He looked a little younger when I knew him, but yeah, this is him. So, I decided when I got back to Paris that, I was always, really working hard as a model and trying to do well. And I was like, I just want to have fun too. So us models would all get together, photographers, and we'd go out, we'd go dancing. And, Paris at that time, there was these clubs that everybody went to. There was like the Bain Douche, which was very big, and the Palladium. But there were also these smaller clubs like Elysée Matignon and Privé. And I liked the smaller clubs. I went to all of them. But I'd go out, like I said, with other models and photographers. And at these places, there was lots of celebrities, lots of famous people. So Roman and I met, and he and I became friendly. And I used to go over to his apartment. We'd talk. We ate a couple times at his place. He invited me to a party he was having in his apartment, uh, and it was a small gathering. Um, and I went with my sister who was in town, and Mick Jagger was at the party. So, but he took us around and he introduced us personally to everybody. He was like, this is so and so, this is Joe, this is Mick, and I was just like, oh, hello. I made sure that I talked to Mick Jagger a bit too, but and he was lovely actually. And this was sort of the life that you have as a model. And I know you've had this lovely model on Barbara on your show a couple times, and she's just amazing. I love listening to her. And she talks about sort of that her era. Well, in my era too, there was all of this going on, with different celebrities and sort of the elites. And as a model, you have really entree into that world. People ask me now, like, how could you have been friendly with Roman Polanski? And I just go, well, I didn't know what he was guilty of. There was no internet back then, sort of rumors. But he had left America to get out of potential jail time. He had initially done a plea deal and was doing a lesser charge for an R that he had with a 13-year-old. And and then he just, when that looked like it was going to fall through, he fled. But I didn't know that. I didn't know that he was a predator. And but I did know, like, at the party, his girlfriend was there and she was 14. She was there with her mother. Yeah. And she was an actress, obviously, a fledgling, she wanted to be an actress. And I know who she is. I won't use her name, but she is in Hollywood at the moment. So she's not a super star, like A-list actress, but she's working Hollywood actress. And she was there with her mother. So her mother was obviously like one of those stage moms, and was like, here, I have my daughter. So it's a crazy period in many ways. But I talk about some of the celebrities that I met in my book because they're sort of interesting stories, and it's also a look into that life and that lifestyle, because it is a lot of that where you mix with different people. Like, you just had Warren Beatty's photo op. I had a girl staying with me, and she was actually dating Warren Beatty. So I ended up speaking to him on the phone once because he called looking for her, and she wasn't around. She was gone on a trip, and I thought it was funny he didn't know that. But anyway, he was a funny man. We had a sort of odd conversation, but it was a nice guy. And he's like, oh, well, if you ever want, I'm staying at the Plaza Athénée. And I wasn't going to contact him, but I was having more trouble with my bookings. And I was wondering if Gerald Marie was sabotaging my career again. And so I ended up calling the Plaza one day, and he invited me to have lunch with him in his suite. So I went, and it was just beautiful spread, and gorgeous view. Like a suite. It was like there was like a bedroom off to the side that I never saw, but there was it was a big living room, and he ended up being a really nice man. Was a mentor in the way that he talked to me about what he had done and how to handle the business. I mean, he was an actor, but there's a lot of overlap in how that industry works and how fashion industry works. And he was a really sweet man. He was a big playboy as well. I mean, I remember looking at his Wikipedia like about 5 years ago, and it actually listed all of these women that he had been with. It was like he was notorious for it. And I think that's down now. I think he's someone who was working with him realized that wasn't a good thing to have up. But there was literally 40, 50 women like that was listed on his Wikipedia page. But I mention him in my book. And again, it's just sort of like to establish like what that kind of life was like. Because I think that's, it is sort of, it's not like, your regular, middle class life where you're off, going to the mall on Saturdays or going grocery shopping. It's a whole different animal. So
I just want to add that Laurie's links, Instagram, website, LinkedIn, book, all those links are in the description box. Just going back to Mick Jagger briefly then.
Yep.
Was he a gentleman towards you? What was he doing?
Yeah, so he was at this party, and he was very nice and very sort of just interested in having a chat. So again, this party that Roman Polanski had, there was maybe 15 people there. So it wasn't a huge party at all. So everybody had a chance to mingle, and he was very impressed because I had just seen him in Germany. He was in Hanover, and I'd gone to his concert like 2 weeks before I met him. I was like, I just saw you in Hanover. He was like, no kidding. I was like, yeah. So I was just trying to be cool, because it was Mick Jagger. I was trying not to be too anything. Just keep my cool, Laurie. But another funny part of that story is I ran into him 9 years later, and we just talked, and I didn't, nothing happened. And he was a very smart man. I will say that about him. Very, very smart man, and very, also easygoing and generous with his time. But I ran into him again 9 years later in Barbados at a very small outdoor club. And the friends that I was were like, go say hi to your friend, Mick. And I'm like, oh, he's not my friend. And anyway, we ended up at one point being on the dance floor together, and we walked off together, Mick Jagger and I, and we started talking. And I said, I've actually met you before. It's a long time ago. I'm sure you don't remember. It was at Roman Polanski's. And he looks at me and he goes, you were with your sister.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, oh my God, like how did you do that? Like, how do you? And I think that just shows how incredibly smart he is. And a lot of people who like sort of excel to the very top of their fields like that, I think they really have like a different view of the world, and also have that kind of ability. So that's
all right. So what is the story then behind this picture?
Well, this is someone that that I would like to find. She was one of the bookers in Paris Planning. And she was, someone that her first name's Pamela. And she's sort of, we'd like to speak to her because she did take a friend of mine, one of my survivor sisters, down to the south of France, where she was introduced to Adnan Khashoggi. And she, this survivor ended up in a relationship with Adnan, and later had found out that she was the agency, Paris Planning, was paid $50,000 to meet her. So he had picked her out, this model. He had picked her out of a book and said, I'll take that one. And then this woman had brought her down, and she was a booker at the time. And we'd love to sort of talk to her and, find out what she might know.
And how do you spell Khashoggi's first name?
Adnan, Adnan, Khashoggi. So he was
weapons dealer, wasn't he?
Yeah, an arms dealer, exactly. So I have a story too about almost being trafficked to an arms dealer. So that's Adnan Khashoggi. So yeah, that's him there.
And did he meet an untimely ending?
I'm not sure. I don't think so, but I'm not sure how he passed away. He's of the Khashoggi family. There was the reporter that was that was killed and chopped up to get out of, I think he was at some sort of a consulate or embassy, or
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're related. But he was a billionaire. I was taken down. My roommate Sharon in Paris. She invited me down to the south of France with her, and she said some guy had invited her, and I was like, "Well, do you know this person?" And she was very adventurous, and I was always the more reserved one in the group. But she convinced me to go down and for this weekend in the south of France. And so I didn't know, but at the time, but I've since heard a lot of girls, women, would go down and then they'd sort of disappear and they'd be sold off to harems or just never come back. Like a lot of the models that I talk to now, there's lots of stories about that. Of course, I don't know anything about it at the time, and I go down and one of the first things that this man did who picked us up was took us to meet Gaith Farrawan. And we walked in and there's, caviar and there's all this, beautiful view. And he was an older man, gray hair. And he had a friend there, like some woman that he was, I think, seeing. But he decided he was going to take us on a tour. And we walked down. We went into a garage. It was a building, so it wasn't a private residence. But we went down into the garage, and we're walking, and there's all these beautiful cars, Maseratis, and McLarens and Ferraris and all this stuff. And I said to him, I said, "Oh, well, which one's yours?" And he stopped and he laughed and he went, "They're all mine," like that.
Oh, God.
So yeah, so he ended up being the 5th richest man in the world.
Wow.
And I had, back then, this is 1982. And it wasn't until like the following day, like that night we went out, and the following day we got invited on his yacht, and we ended up going to a beach that was totally deserted, except for this one very long table, meticulously made up with linens and everything, and all this amazing food, and and there were already guests there, but it was like this totally deserted beach. It was the oddest thing. And so we went there, and it was just Sharon and I were young, and then there's all these older men. And that's when I started thinking, no one knows where I am. The guy next to me is hitting on me, and he's got brown leathery skin. He's like, 80 years old or 60 years old. I said to my roommate Sharon, I was like, "We've got to leave here tonight. We have to make sure we get on our plane back to Paris." So we ended up, the friend of hers, made sure that we did leave, and we did get our plane. But when I was writing my book, I researched this guy, and I actually, because I had a photo of him, and I researched him, and he had bankrupted the BCCI, Bank of Credit and Commerce International. He was wanted by Interpol for arms dealing, alleged transporting of people. And, I just think, like my guardian angels must have been looking after me. So.
Yeah, he was in the network, the same business dealings, with Robert Maxwell's network. And according to his wiki page, he was, as well as his marriages, he maintained a harem of 12 women who were described as his pleasure wives. One was Jill Dodd, former model and fashion designer he met in 1980, who went on to write a memoir about their relationship called The Currency of
Love. Yeah, that's her. That's a friend of mine. So that's Adnan. And then there was also Gaith Farrawan, who I was with, but she was involved with him. And she had found out that there was $50,000 paid to meet her. Adnan, like that he had literally picked her out of a catalog. He said, "I'll take that one."
Wow.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Adnan died in 2017 being treated for Parkinson's disease at St. Thomas Hospital in London. 81 years old. All right. So we've got another picture here I need to ask you about. This is one of your covers of the Bazaar. Share this one. There we go.
Sure.
That one.
Yeah. So after this whole, Paris, Milan part of my life, I moved back to New York and I started working as a model. And I worked really hard, but things also came my way. And I was very fortunate. I did, become a top model based in New York, but also working all over the world. And so I did a couple Bazaar covers. This was in Australian Bazaar. I did a cover of Vogue. I worked for Interview magazine in Brazil and the various magazines. I worked for a lot of different brands, Nivea and L'Oreal and Avon and Revlon, Gucci, Valentino. I was doing the collections. So, something, clicked my look and I was started out with this agency called Legends, and I moved over to Wilhelmina for a couple years, and then I was with Ford for the last 7 years. So this is I ended up modeling in that realm of modeling, if you will, for 11 years. And then after that, I did some TV commercials and stuff when I left and was at school. So I continued to do TV and things like that after. But yeah, it was a great life in some ways. There was always this predatory aspect to it, and then you were sort of always being introduced to someone. Like at one when I first got back to New York, my booker at that home agency I had, the first one, this is this lady named Patty, and she invited me to go out with Prince Albert of Monaco. So like we went to this place Serendipity in New York and with him and his friend, and then we also went to Heartbreak, which was a club in New York, once with him. And I just, it was always, and I remember saying, well, how do you know him? Oh, I just do. And there was between the playboys and the businessmen, and then like these sort of very wealthy people, and then these royalty, it's like, what are they doing? Like, why are they there? Like, you can see going out to a dinner, work dinner, if people from brands or people from somehow connected to fashion. And that's what I wrote about in this recent article that I had published in Women's Agenda. And that's what I say, like, in the modeling industry, like, what is it with the men? Like, why are these businessmen around, that have no connection to fashion? And I think that's shows part of, how this particular system works, that there's people who want entree to women, and they probably pay their way in. I mean, Virginia Giuffre said that Jean-Luc Brunel had brought 1,000 girls to Epstein. And at one point in that period where I was traveling and doing the collections and like this big part of my career, I did go back to Paris, and I wouldn't go with Gerald, who was with Elite at the time. So I was with Karen's, and lucky me to have be represented by two predators like that. So yeah.
Yeah, and many of those girls were fast-tracked into the United States by the US federal government, who gave them fast-track visas, all part of the pipeline. But we've got another photo here, and let me make this one bigger.
Yeah, so that was Givenchy, that was French Bazaar. So, I started to, go over and just do the collections and fly back. One of the things that Wilhelmina did when I moved to Wilhelmina was introduce me to a photographer, Les Goldberg, who is very well known, and he was really at the top of his game. And I'd already had a Vogue cover and stuff, but we met, and it was just hard to resist. He was very magnetic, and we ended up being together for 4.5 years. And he adored me, and I was like his muse. So he wanted to work with me whenever he could. And, we worked separately too. I had plenty of my own clients, but, we would do things that, whenever we could together. And so he actually took that photo as well. That's Italian Bazaar, the one that's up. And then the one before he took as well, the Givenchy. So that was a very exciting times. People knew that we were together and in the industry. And in some ways, I think it helped because, he was a very good photographer. But then, I think I probably didn't get some jobs too because I was with somebody, and, was lots of sort of lecherous photographers out there who were looking for available girls to book as well. So it was probably, a little bit of both. But one of the fun people that we worked with and knew at that time was Joe Eula. And Joe Eula was this amazing whirling dervish of energy. He was a photo illustrator, fashion illustrator, I should say. He was an artist. He was an editor. He did Marilyn Monroe's sitting, one of the last sittings that she did, styled it with Milton Green. We used to go over to his house in upstate New York and hang out with them. He was a little bit crass. He was a funny guy. Andy Warhol had said, Joe knows everybody who's anybody and anybody who's somebody and all the cool people. So he was like an influencer back in the day. And he was very, very well connected with the whole, the whole thing. So, in fact, if you see the Netflix docudrama on Halston, because Joe was Halston's creative director for the first 10 years with Elsa Peretti, and if you watch that, it's a fascinating docudrama, and Joe's one of the main characters. So he's just another guy that that one of the good ones that I was really happy to have spent time with. I loved the artists, I loved that whole part of the industry. I did magazine work whenever I could. I didn't favor the catalog work very much, but it did pay very well. So, I did a lot of ads too. And it was a really, good run. Unfortunately, Les and I, we split. But then that led me into dating Dodi, Fayed.
Yeah, what's the story behind this photo?
Oh, well, that's Joe. So that's Joe Eula. So
Okay.
that's him. So he's he was the one that was the creative director of Halston. And he also was he was the editor for the Givenchy shoot that you showed as well. So that's Joe. But
Dodi up right now so we can get the Dodi story. Let's see. So how did you meet Dodi?
Well, Les and I split up. There he is. Yeah, he was a very, very sweet guy, actually. So I went into Ford's after Les and I had split, and the industry is relatively small, and as everybody knew, we were together. Everybody knew we split, and Eileen was there, and Eileen was she was a very tough woman, and you didn't mess with her, and she made everybody nervous, I think. So I walked in, I saw her there, and she said, "Oh, I hear you and Les aren't together anymore." And I said, "Oh no, yeah, it's a shame, but it just didn't work out." And I said, she says, "Well, are you dating anybody else?" And I said, "No, why? Do you know anybody?" And it was just very flippant. And she goes, "I might." And then she gave Dodi Fayed my number. So Dodi called me a couple days later, and this was pre-internet, all of the cell phones and everything. But my idea of going for a first date was to go to the San Gennaro Feast in Little Italy, which was like it was a street fair. And he picked me up, and I got in his town car, and we driving along, and then there's a driver and someone else next to him. We hopped out, and then Sky hops out with me and with us, and is following us. I was like, oh my God. So he had a bodyguard. And, you know, it was sort of interesting because you know, I don't remember even Prince Albert having a bodyguard, you know. So I was like, okay, well, this is kind of different. So here we are in this New York street fair, right? I'm walking around with Dodi, and he's trying to win me, you know, one of the stuffed animals that they have. You know, I think he's doing the basketball or something, and he's trying to win me stuff. You know, failed miserably. I'm like, oh, don't worry about it, you know. And meanwhile, yeah, it was. He was. I think he was a little embarrassed about it, but the next day he showed up. Not him, but the bodyguard. There's a knock at my door in my carriage house, and I go down, and there's the bodyguard standing there with this teddy bear from FAO Schwartz. Really big, soft, beautiful teddy bear, you know. And I thought to myself, well, that's really sweet and that's really cute, you know. And so I didn't know him very well. Like he had already produced Chariots of Fire. I knew that he had produced that, and I knew that he was, you know, producing other movies too. So that's really all I knew about him. I didn't know, you know, that much about him. In those days, you really, you know, you didn't have the internet. You couldn't look up everything on somebody. So you just sort of slowly got to know him. But I thought, well, that's a nice sign. Like that shows like a lot of heart, you know, that he would do that. And I thought, oh, I'll go out with him again. And you know, we had afternoon tea at the Pierre. And I remember him being really fascinated by the fact that I'd been on my own at that point about 9 years, I think, and modeling. And he couldn't believe that I had like, done all these things and succeeded on my own, that my family didn't help me at all, because they didn't help me financially, my family. You know, they weren't really keen that I moved. And then they didn't give me any money. So I created my own, you know, security, my own financial security. And I always thought that was odd. But then, you know, later, I mean, he's obviously very famous now, and there's lots of information on him. And even watching The Crown, I can see how his father was very, you know, tight and sort of controlled him as well through the money. But, you know, when I was with him, he was very gentlemanly. He was, you know, very intelligent, sophisticated man. And we then had a dinner date at the 21 Club. He was throwing a party for the FX2 crew that he had, because he had was working on that movie. So there was Brian Brown, who was in the movie, from Australia, and his wife, Rachel Ward, there. We, you know, we had this lovely dinner. In fact, last year I saw Brian Brown in Brisbane Writers Festival, because he had a new book that had come out. And I went up and I was talking to him, and I mentioned the dinner. He's like, oh my God, I remember that dinner. He's only been to 21 Club twice. So, you know, and it was like, it was a slow, you know, dating romance. Like I wasn't in any hurry. We weren't, you know, getting serious or anything, you know. But he then organized for me to have a nice massage at his place while he was away. And then he asked me to go meet him on his yacht, like that famous yacht, you know, that Princess Di was on. I happened to be visiting a girlfriend of mine in Monaco at the time. She was a model with me. Her name was Caroline. And I used to go visit her all the time. And I said, look, I'm going to be there. He said, well, I'll send the helicopter for you, and you can come, you know, and then you can come join me. So about, you know, a couple days before the date that we had agreed, I started calling him. You know, so again, there weren't cell phones, but there was like a ship to shore capacity on the boat. And I'm getting these guys, you know, answering the phone, and, you know, who is this? And nobody really, you know, knew exactly where Dodi was. Oh, I think he's water skiing. Oh, I think he's here. Oh, I think he's there. And it's like, all right, well, tell him Laurie called. And they're like, who? And it was, I left several messages. I left like 3 messages. And And then, I didn't hear back, and I left the number of where I was. And I thought, well, that's really odd, because he was a very, gentlemanly type of man. I thought, well, why would you invite me if then you were not going to be available or whatever? So when I arrived back to New York a couple weeks later, he calls me up and he's like, "Where were you?" And I'm like, "What? Where was I?" I was like, no. I said, "Look, I called," and he started this whole thing, and I just said, "Look, there was another incident that happened with his bodyguard where I sort of got a warning, and I talk about that in my book. And I thought, no, it just doesn't feel right. And I said, look, you're a great man. I'm sure you'll find you've got lots of women, but I just don't think this is going to work between us. So yeah, so I broke it off.
Would you say that the portrayal of him in The Crown was accurate then?
The betrayal, which
the
part?
Portrayal. The portrayal.
Oh, the portrayal. I would say that I think he was portrayed a little more demurely than I remember him. Like, I thought in The Crown he was obviously under his father's thumb, right? Financially.
Yeah.
I could see that. Yeah. So and again, because we had this conversation where he was just so amazed that I had, done what I'd done, and that I didn't do it with family help. So I assume that he was, he wanted to be his own man. Like he loved doing his work in movies, but his father wasn't very keen on him doing that and didn't think it was serious. I mean, the man won an Academy Award for Chariots of Fire. It was an amazing movie. And still, I feel sort of sad for him in a way. I think he's a little bit of a tragic figure because of that. Because he was just born into this family that had all these expectations and it's just was terrible. I still remember I was walking in the West Village when I heard that he and Diana had passed away. I was walking along, and it really hit me because we weren't serious. We weren't seriously we weren't like together. But we had spent quite a few dates and time together, and I thought that it was just really sad. It made me really sad. I still think it's tragic, the whole thing.
Yeah, it was. I remember it was all over the news, all over the world, and even to this day, there's a lot of theories behind what happened. But let's move on. We've got this next image.
Yeah, so that was in Brazil. So I had been asked to go to Brazil. Ford was, I think Eileen and Jerry, they were trying to establish their own agencies in foreign countries because there was an expose, I think it was I can't remember the year now, but I think there was a lot of talk. People knew that about Jean-Luc Brunel, and people knew about, that there were these predators, these men who were predators, these agents who were predators. So they opened up Ford in Japan, and they had wanted me to go, but I didn't want to go. And then they had Ford Brazil, and they said, well, why don't you go down to Brazil? And I thought, oh, well, that sounds like fun. So they wanted me to go and help Katie Ford open up and handle the press and stuff like that. And then I could stay on and I could work for other magazines. So I did. I went down with her and a couple other models from New York, and we did that. And one of the first bookings was for Interview, and I was very excited because it was, Brazilian Interview, but it was like the similar to the Interview magazine that Andy Warhol did that was very famous in New York. It was like, often magazines would have other ones in different parts of the world. So I did the cover, and I worked for Vogue. I worked for a lot of different clients down in Brazil. But I remember right before I was leaving, there was a phone call at my agency, Ford, Brazil, and my booker Anna said, "Oh, look, the publisher of the magazine, someone in the family wants to take you out to dinner to celebrate your cover." And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, should I go?" And she's like, "Oh, yeah. He's a very big family. Yes, you should go." So another elite, right? So I was like, "Okay, well, I'll go. I'll just go have dinner with them." So we went and had dinner. He was an older man with a little bit of silver through his hair, and he gave me this cover, like a mock-up of it, and he said, "This is it." And I was really pleased. I was happy. I thought it was sort of artsy and cool. It had Marilyn Monroe. I don't know if you can see that on the shirt. And we had a nice conversation about, I don't know, the economy that was bad in Brazil at the time, and a bunch of other things. And then we left, and he said to me, "Oh, well, come back to my apartment. It's you need to see the view. You won't believe the view. The view is just amazing." And I was like, I'd been around the block a little bit since then. So I was like, "Oh, look, I can't." And I did have a booking the next day. I said, "No, I have a booking, and this has been lovely though. And thank you so much. And I really enjoyed it. And I'm so excited. And I said all the right things." And he was like, "Oh, no, but you have to come with me." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, thank you again. But no." And he kept at it. Like, I'm standing outside arguing with this man, and where I was staying, the apartment I was staying was just a couple blocks away. And Brazil was notoriously dangerous. Like, I loved Brazil. I loved the people, but literally they would cut your hand off if you were wearing a Rolex watch. Like, that's how dangerous it was. I was taken on most of my appointments with a driver who carried a gun. It was like in the door handle, in the door jamb. So I was like, I'm not going to go, and I don't know this person, and how am I going to get home? And I'm thinking all these things, and I'm trying to just get out of it. So he said to me finally, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "Yes, yeah, I'm sure. Thank you very much." So I left, and 2 days later, the magazine came out, and I was not on the cover. So I was at Ford, and the magazine had arrived, and my bookers were looking at it, and they're like, well, what happened? And they're frantically calling to try to find out what's going on. And the cover, instead of me that you had just shown, there was a full-length shot. It looked like something that had been on the inside of the magazine, that they just decided, we'll just put this one on the cover. It was like some random girl in fishnets, and it didn't look like a cover. And I thought, well, anything but putting me, the girl who wouldn't go home with them on the cover.
Wow.
So yeah. So that's sort of how the industry worked. Sometimes, I think Barbara had mentioned this too. Like, sometimes it's great, and it's just you can work with creative people, you can do good work, and it's exciting. And then sometimes you just run into predators like that. So I was unhappy, but it started me thinking, I need to get out of this industry. And within about a year and a half or so, I left. I thought there'll be other covers, and there was. I did the cover of Town and Country right before I retired. It was just 2 months before. And Ford didn't even believe I was leaving. They thought that I was going to Elite. It's probably the only agents I hadn't been with in New York. But I was, I knew all about John Casablanca. I had heard the stories. He really promoted these wild wild models in drugs and sex, and that was his shtick. That's how he sold. He would tell the girls, and I just knew that wasn't me anyway. So I just thought, by that time, when I left the industry, from the first time in New York to the end, it was 11 years that I had been doing it. So, but there was a lot of that transporting of models. We mentioned Jill. Carrie Otis also says that she's been she was transported, all the Epstein victims. And then, there's that famous story too of Karen Mulder, who was this, supermodel. Have you heard that one, Shaun, about
No,
what
what
had
is it?
happened to her? So Karen Mulder was a very big model. She was with Gerald as well. I guess she was like in that, what became known as like a supermodel in the 90s. She was being interviewed on TV in France. There was a live studio audience, and she just started suddenly talking about how she had been raped by Gerald Marie, and then also by Prince Albert of Monaco, and that she had been transported to other men, and it was like she just started like exposing all this stuff, and they sort of shut it all down. They never aired it. I think they destroyed the tape, right? So it was a taped, but it was a live studio audience, but they were taping it. And like you couldn't keep it under wraps because there was all these people that heard it. It was like a full studio. It was in French TV. So Gerald Marie immediately interceded. He took her and he put her in a mental health institution where she stayed for a couple months.
Wow.
And yeah. And there's a lot of people in the industry that, try to reach out to her here and there. But she's sort of like, she's just keeps to herself. And, but she was a very big model. Yeah. So
what was it like? What was it like meeting Oprah Winfrey?
Yeah. So, I met Oprah when I got out of the modeling industry and I went back to university. I decided to apply to Columbia. I was like, well, might as well. And they accepted me, and then I had to go full time though. They offered me a scholarship as long as I went full time. So I started writing, and I knew a model friend of mine from London because I had been in London in that period where I was working all the time, and his husband was Oprah Winfrey's interior decorator. So Anthony Brown was his name. He was working on one of Oprah's houses. So, I knew him when he was working on other people's homes, but suddenly he had Oprah as a client. And so, which was very exciting for him and all of us. And he had a dinner party for her. And so I went to that. I was invited, and it wasn't very large. It was a small dinner party, but I went, and there she was. She was sitting there. I sat down next to her. We had a drink together. We were talking. I had sort of, in a way, she had been such a big influence in America, and the way that she had people on to talk about very difficult subjects, and it was almost like group therapy for the person and like the audience, but then it was like therapy for the country in a way, and wherever else her show went to. So I thought what she was doing was remarkable, sort of shining a light on all of the things that people, that all the things that had happened to people that they often didn't talk about. And so I respected that she did that. And she was exactly like she is on her show, but in person, she was exactly the same. She was very interested. She wanted to know about, my writing, and she knew that I was back at school, and she kind of took an interest in me. And then she called me like the next day or 2 days later. So I had like that famous Oprah phone call where, hello, it's Oprah. And you're like, hi, Oprah. And so she introduced me to some of her staff, and I wrote something for O magazine at the time. And it was right in that time, like she's one of the best connections you could have, right? Like when I went back to school, I was really interested in helping other people. I felt like I'd spent so many years as a model, very sort of, focused on myself, and I had to be focused on how I looked. And it was very sort of staring at the belly button kind of, profession and posturing and all this. And I just wanted to do something authentic, and I just really wanted to help people. So that's why I became a psychotherapist, and that's the degrees I got at school to do that. So that was great to meet Oprah, because it sort of fit right into what I was planning on doing. And I'd written an article for the Los Angeles Times about the supermodels, which I found that expression a little silly, and I talked about how supers, what does that mean? Is it like super people, like a superman, or and why do we put people on pedestals like that? And because I had been asked to photograph a fashion show, Richard Tyler's fashion show, with a friend of mine who was a photojournalist with the Los Angeles Times, and then the fashion editor was interested in this article because I ran into Cindy Crawford in the bathroom, and her and I had worked together. And suddenly I was like on the other side of the camera, and there was like this moment that we had. And so it was an interesting article anyway. So there was all this stuff going on. And at the same time I'd met Oprah, I also met my husband. And I ended up, we got married, and I moved to Australia, and then 9/11 happened. And it was just like, I never, really pursued that connection with Oprah, but I'd love to see her now if she's around and she hears this.
And it was in Australia then you started to expose Gerard Marie, wasn't it?
Yeah, look, it was I'm old, so I've had a very long life, so if you bear with me. So yeah, we were here for 10 years, and then it was actually when we moved back to America for a few years in there. I've been married now 25 years next year. And yeah, so the Me Too movement happened, and I gave speeches at the women's marches in Sag Harbor where I was living. And then, Me Too was a really seminal moment in the world, Shaun. It was the first time that women were believed, and our narratives were listened to, right? So it was something that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. Like, I've told you all the story now. I've been roofied, I've been essayed, I've been had jobs held over my head, and not, career sabotaged, and all this stuff. And there was very little that women could do in the day, but I think Me Too has really changed the culture in a way. Like, we're not quite there yet, but just what's going on with all the exposure that Bill Cosby's gotten, and Weinstein, and there's just a list of men who've been exposed. Of course, Jeffrey Epstein now is so important, and what's going on. But I was paying attention to all of this because the movement was very important to me, and I'd done a lot of studies, women's studies, and I was focusing my therapy clients and who I wanted to work with, which was a lot of women. I mean, I ended up doing, veterans, and I see quite a few different people now. But in any case, I saw in The Guardian, there was an article, and someone had exposed Gerald Marie. And I was just like, wow. And the article asked if anyone knew, had any other information. And I had shared my story of Gerald Marie on Facebook, but I hadn't named him. And I thought, oh, all right, I'll call up this reporter Lucy Osborne with The Guardian. And I was going to just talk to her anonymously. And then, as I was waiting to get on the call with her, I realized that I needed to really talk about this and use my name and sort of own what had happened and not be anonymous. So I did that. There's 16 of us that have come forward and given testimony to the French prosecutors. So we still haven't gotten justice. We've had issues with the statute of limitations. We decided that we would, work on trying to change laws, and we would be advocates and do some activism. So we ended up talking to the French Senate and addressing them and talking about stopping violence against women and changing laws, particularly around the statute of limitations. And then in 2022, a group of us went to the EU Parliament, and we each gave speeches. Some did it remotely, and there was a big group of us that went as well. And we talked about how there really needs to be this change in laws, and because it's one thing for women to come forward and people to go, yes, we believe you now, or yeah, but the accountability is the thing. How do you get? How do you actually hold someone accountable for what they've done? And if you're outside the statute of limitations, then it's just really, really difficult. So, but I think that all the stuff that we do, it is all helpful. I'm really proud of the work that I've done as an activist. That's a picture from 60 Minutes Australia. So the other thing we've been able to do is just to tell our story. And after the Guardian article ran, the Channel 7 here called me up, and I did some press on Channel 7 here in Australia. And then 60 Minutes saw it, and Theodosios from 60 Minutes contacted me, and she was just going to do a segment on myself and what had happened, because I live here in Australia, and I'm Australian as well as American. And then I told her about everybody else, and there was a group of us, and they ended up doing an hour-long special called Beauty and the Creep. And it's had 6 million views on YouTube.
Wow.
Yeah. And it is still to this day one of the best, I think, exposés of what has happened and of the tale of Gerald Marie. So it's definitely worth your viewers to have a look at that. The BBC did some coverage when we talked to the French Senate. Euronews covered when we were at Brussels and giving our speech then. So we've had quite a bit of press, like CBS in America has also run our story. So there it is. It's Beauty and the Creep. There it is. How many millions of views now?
7 million views.
7 now. Okay.
I'll put the link for this in the description box as well.
If anyone wants any more information on that, that's a really good place, good source. It was very well done. So that's sort of where we are. I mean, Shaun, as a survivor, you just follow everybody else's story as well. And you root for everybody else to get the justice. We haven't been able to, but you really do. You just hope that other women who come forward and they tell their stories, that something will happen. I'm really hopeful that the Epstein survivors will have, their day, and other people will be held accountable. I can't believe what they've been through, and that, this sort of elite structures that protect, basically, what do you call them?
PDF files.
PDF files. Yeah. I mean, this has to stop. I've been really looking even more closely at the modeling industry. Like now, I've been out of it for many years, but I've been doing it through writing my book, and then also the last article that I wrote, and listening to all these other stories, and of course Jean-Luc Brunel, who was involved so heavily with Epstein and the whole modeling thing. And then there's this guy, that was named Zamponi, and this whole way that they would get models over on visas and then stick them into these apartments and charge them a lot of money, and then somehow they don't have, they're not working though. So and I know for a fact that agents can push certain girls to get work. So and that if someone's not working, like, yeah, it might be a little bit that the model's, the way that she looks is not in style or something, but I know for a fact that agents can get models work. So the fact that they were bringing in all these youngsters, and I mean, obviously Jean-Luc Brunel was doing it for the sole purpose of funneling girls to Epstein. I mean, it's disgusting, and using like the modeling industry as part of the business model, if you will. Where agents were kind of like pimps, weren't they? I mean, look, Eileen Ford introduced me to Dodi Fayed. I thought, and I still do kind of think, she was a very good agent. She, I don't think she was paid to introduce Dodi to me. But, after you hear Jill's story and other people's, and then the whole idea that there's all these men around all the time in the modeling industry, and, I really don't know. I don't really know what happened or what it was all about. Michael Gross, who's written another fantastic book called Model, the Ugly Business of Beautiful Women. So that's Michael Gross. And, he said Eileen was known for trying to introduce her girls to someone because she knew that modeling was a short career. And then after that, she'd introduce them to doctors and lawyers and things like that. And I guess if you're just like being a matchmaker and you're genuinely concerned about your models, and that's one thing. But, I think there's too much going on. And certainly the way that the industry, I think, evolved, even, like when I got out of it, and the stories that I'm hearing now about how they run their businesses, and they're taking way too many models that there'll never be enough work. They just take models on. And then what do they do with them? They run up bills. And then what do they do? Introduce them at a party to wealthy men, Yeah, there's something transporty about that, Shaun.
Well said. How has reading Virginia's book affected you?
Well, it's such a heart-wrenching book, and yet it's entirely inspiring in that she was so brave and so resilient, such a fighter. It was really hard to read the abuse that she suffered. I know you've read a bit of it too. So she goes into quite a bit of detail about some of her experiences, and particularly with a prime minister who brutalized her. And I think that it was good that she did that because, people talk about, being art or being SA'd, right? And it becomes like, oh yeah, but the description of what happens or what that looks like or the aftermath of it. And, when she talks about bleeding, and she thought she was going to die, and it's so impactful. And I think it's a hard truth that people need to hear. There's so much talk these days about these things, and there's a lot of survivors that have come forward, and I'm so grateful for all of them because they're all helping to change the culture. But I think people can get a little, you hear enough of it and you go, yeah, well, whatever. And it's like, no, no. And even some of the women in my survivor group with Gerald Marie and I know quite a few Jean-Luc Brunel survivors too, like their experiences were brutal. Brutal. Like mine, I can talk about it. It sometimes still triggers me, but it's okay. And I've had other survivors say, we really need you, Laurie, to tell your story because you can do it more than I can because you got away. I've had one survivor tell me that, and it breaks my heart. And I know this woman very well, and she was very, very brutally ard by Joelle Marie. And the survivors, they carry it with them their whole lives. I mean, I work all the time with survivors of abuse as a therapist. And I know the damage that it does, the trauma that it inflicts. It's something, it's like a life sentence, really. So the perpetrator can walk away and not think about it again. Whereas the woman or whoever's gone through the experience will have nightmares, will be triggered by sounds or smells or and they'll feel like they're right back in that situation. Sometimes people just dissociate, during the event. There's all these psychological processes that go on during the trauma. And then there's also, because I work a lot with, like I said, with people who've experienced trauma, but there's a whole school of thought now how trauma actually lodges in the body. Gabor Mate, and there's another book called The Body Keeps the Score with, I think his last name is Vessel, but a very, very, very well-known therapist, psychotherapist, psychiatrist, who write about trauma, and they think that it's, it just lodges there. So it's a physical thing. Like when I was growing up, psychology and emotions, it was like, oh yeah, well that's not that important. It's like, what's going on with you physically is more important. But now science shows that in fact, when you have emotions, chemicals are released in your body, right? So it is physical. Emotional trauma is physical. It's not just in your mind or the way you think. It is in your body. So, and it is very hard to come forward and talk about these things. So, like I said, I'm a big advocate and I support all survivors who come forward. If anyone knows anything about Gerald Marie or the woman that we put up before, feel free to contact me, DM me on Instagram. I've with a group of ladies, we're pretty supportive of each other. So I'd be happy to hear from anyone who has any other information.
So you got a question from Kaza. Can Laurie relate to Virginia's book? And if so, which aspects?
Oh, thank you for that question. Yeah, I do relate to her book. And I think it's because of the powerlessness that she experienced and that she captures very well, that she didn't have, she wasn't held captive by, chains but she was in situations where she couldn't get out of, and she had no power. And I did feel like that at a few times in my career, and particularly during the times when I was, essayed. So it's I think it's something that all survivors share.
Yeah, and she even details the moral contradictions, the cross currents in her mind. For example, she understands the monstrous stuff that's going on around her, while simultaneously she's got these pseudo parental figures, Jeffrey and Maxwell, and she's seeking things that a daughter would seek from parents: approval and love, and being considered like someone who's one of the top girls, because when she realizes she's upset, but she's just stuck in this complete moral inversion, and it's just got this Stockholm syndrome type contradictions running through her mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And just the way that any sort of scrap of attention that he gave her, she was grateful for, because he didn't do, like, there was one part in the book where he said, I put my hand on her, or he put his hand on my back. I think it was right before he asked if she would have the baby for him. And she said, well, that wasn't like him, but, it felt good. Or, there was a couple times when she mentioned, she would feel like special, like, because that's all she wanted. Like, that's all anybody wants, is to be seen and heard, in life. Like, that's so important, and that's why, like, those early childhood experiences are so important, because our parents, mirror for us that, I see you, right? I see you, and this is who you are, and you're valuable. And if you don't get that, then you sort of look for it, in your life. And yeah, it's such an incredible story. And she was such an incredible woman. I feel really awful that she met her end here as well, in Australia. I don't know if you've also seen, the 60 Minutes did a special on, sort of her passing, Virginia Giuffre's passing. And it talks about her struggles in her family that had been previously she hadn't really shared. And I don't know if you noticed, in the foreword to her book, the ghostwriter says that, some of the brothers had wanted more of that to come out, like the things that allegedly her husband had done to her. So, but there was Tara Brown, who interviewed me for 60 Minutes, did this special, and it's also very, very good. If anyone hasn't seen that, they should definitely take a look at that.
Yeah, we've got Ryan Dawson coming on tomorrow at 1 p.m. UK to discuss the book and Prince Andrew and stuff. So I'm trying to get through. I'm trying to get through it as much of it as possible. I'm at the part now where they're pitching Virginia the legal papers for her to have the baby for them, and they're schmoozing her, and that's making a thing. Do I want to put a child into this world of these monsters? And she's also been brutalized by someone she's calling the prime minister. And I think, there's a lot of speculation that is Ehud Barak, former prime minister of Israel, but mainstream media are not really reporting that as usual. They're only focusing on Prince Andrew. But for people who've not seen the book, it's like she's in these situations. She says she gets transported to a multitude of men. Some of them are prize-winning scientists in their 70s who are calling her a good girl after they've done these things. So it's so sickening. But the worst, the ones that makes her really snap, is the prime minister guy, because not only does he SA her, he strangles her until she's unconscious, which arouses him, and she can't breathe properly for days afterwards. And she goes to Epstein and says she didn't want to, be involved with this person again. And he's saying, well, sorry, this just happens sometimes.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. He just kind of shrugs, like, oh yeah, that happens sometimes. It's like, well, in what world? In what world does that happen sometimes? That's what I just...
And she does end up being forced to go with this guy again. It's not as horrific as the first time, but these are the things that make her change her mind and decide to get out of there. And it was the prime minister encounter, according to the book, and also the pitching of the legal papers of the baby. They wanted her baby. But the thing that disgusted me, I mean, it's all horrific, Laurie, but the thing that disgusted me the most, and it was because she was only 6 and 7 years old, was what she alleged about her father. I mean, I felt sick. And then when he brought in his mate, who he called Uncle Forrest, and they were swapping daughters. Oh,
I know.
Disgusting.
I know, right? And she had never really disclosed that either. So I think until this book, I think maybe. But yeah, the whole, what people can do to each other and to children is just it's shocking. It's really shocking. Like,
And how they rationalized it, Laurie, because when Uncle Forrest, he wasn't a real uncle, just a dad's mate, who was doing things to his own stepdaughter, when Uncle and got in a criminal case for it, when Uncle Forrest found God, they made Virginia get on her knees like she had done so many times before. This is how she described it.
Yeah.
And he says to her, basically, it's your fault. You made us do this.
Yeah, blaming the victim. She's a kid. I know. It's infuriating, isn't it? Like, yeah, blame the victim, shame. You know, that's why I don't know if you followed Giselle Picoult, her story where she's a French woman and her husband had drugged her and then invited men from all over to come in and essay her and her. And he was caught by a fluke because he was like going under some other girl's dress in a store, and he was caught, and then they got his stuff and they found him. But she's like a hero, right? And what she basically did is she said, I'm going to be here, you know, I'm not going to be ashamed. Shame belongs on the other side. And it was such a powerful thing, you know. It's like this, like in Virginia's book, when her father and this guy is trying to shame her. You need to, you know, you need to pray. You know, you did this wrong, and you know, no. Right? It's like take accountability. This is you, and you should be ashamed. And that's a real gift that Giselle, I think, gave to France and to the world. I know it was a case that shocked France, who's, you know, they're pretty relaxed in their sort of the way that they approach sexuality, let's say. But that case shocked the world, right? And she had so much support, and she's a hero because she refused to be anonymous. She says, "Oh, I'm not going to be ashamed anymore. It's these people that need to be ashamed."
Yeah, and good on her. All right, do you have time to answer some more viewer questions, Laurie?
Oh, sure, Shaun.
Okay. Nadine wants to know, did you ever meet Naomi Campbell or Jerry Hall?
I did not meet either of them in Paris. No, no, I didn't. I worked with, I think I mentioned this. Yeah, I worked with Whitney Houston when she was starting out, as she modeled a little bit with Wilhelmina, and I actually did a catalog with her. And I worked with Cindy Crawford, and but I didn't run into Jerry. Obviously I ran into Mick, but I think they were together still then too. But no. And Naomi, look, there's a photo in Virginia's book where she's at Naomi Campbell's birthday party, and she looks very out of place, right? Because she's just a child. And I think it was Naomi Campbell's 31st birthday party. And the Epstein and Maxwell had taken her to this party. So she doesn't say too much, but yeah, Naomi's, interesting woman. She just seems to be everywhere, you know?
Was Cindy Crawford a nice person?
Cindy, her and I were booked to do the cover of Brides magazine together. So the thing about Cindy was, she walked in, and I'd never seen anybody work like that before. She was literally on from the moment she walked in the studio, and like everything she did seemed to be like, very sort of like, like she was almost working, almost like she was on set. She was like a walking. I've never seen that before in my life. Most models, they come in and there's like they walk in and they plop down on the makeup chair, and then the magic happens, and they get on set and they do their thing. So, but she was very funny like that, and she wasn't very chatty with me, but it was really funny because she was the bride and I was the bridesmaid. I still have a Polaroid of that I should have said that to you, Shaun. But yeah, and Whitney Houston and I in little bathrobes for some catalog. So, but and then when I ran into her, where I wrote this article, and it's still on the Los Angeles Times archives. I can't remember what it was called now, but if you put it in anyway, she just kind of looked at me, and I looked at her, and she didn't say anything. She wasn't like overly friendly, but maybe she was busy, and it's all fine. Not every model's chatty, but a lot of us were. I knew so many people in the business, models were, and usually quite smart women too. Like there's this idea that models are just sort of good looking, but not much, upstairs. But most of the working models, you had to be very clever to survive in the industry, to manage it. You were like your own brand, but you had to manage your agent. You had to meet all these new people. You had to convince people that they should hire you. You had to show up. You had to look good. You had to do a good job. You had to sell. I asked Eileen Ford once. I said, "Oh, Eileen, can you give me any tips? Like, like what do you think modeling's about?" And she just looked at me and she said, "Sell that dress." She turned around and walked away. I was like, okay, I guess it's that simple. So
F has got a few questions for you.
Okay,
Wants to know how competitive was modeling? Did you have to find a lane and run with it? And how did the models stay skinny in New York?
Oh, sure. So yeah, extremely competitive. I mean, and I didn't realize it. Like it just sort of happened for me as I've told my story. But literally thousands and thousands of young girls try to get an agent in New York. I think Eileen Ford had quoted once that she saw like 5,000 girls a year, like 40 years ago. So just getting an agent is a difficult task. And then from there, it's like, like I would go to casting calls where there would be sometimes, I remember going in the collections to go see a couple of designers, and there was like 200 girls, because you couldn't call people beforehand. There was no internet. So everybody would show up with their portfolio, with their card. This was for a Pierre Cardin fashion show. Like 200 girls just on a casting. So it was very competitive. So, but at the same time, when you were working, generally everybody was, professional, like the other models, were professional, and there was some camaraderie in it. But you had all kinds of personalities as well. So, and whether so whether I had a lane and I ran with it, some models, there's a girl that I started with, she is still modeling. So this, like, I started in 81, so it's like 43 years, right? She still does catalog, but that's like all she ever did really was catalog. And she's still doing it. But that was her lane. Like she would make a fortune. Like catalog paid great. Like I was doing, editorial, and they'd pay you $150 a day. But if I did catalog, I'd make, anywhere from $1,500 to $2,500 a day, back in the 80s. So, just this girl just made a fortune, and she just kept doing it. So, but I did a little bit of everything. Like I really enjoyed the editorial. I love the creative side. I did a lot of TV commercials too. I did about 60 TV commercials. So again, different kinds of brands, cosmetics, and Alberto VO5, and I did Chevrolet commercial once, and I'm a member of the Screen Actors Guild, so and they're going to pay me a pension at some point soon, I hope.
You're also getting asked how the girls stay so skinny.
Right. Look, back in the day, there was a lot of smoking, and I think that was big. Also. I didn't know that much about bulimia going on back at that time. Like girls just probably wouldn't eat, I'd say, or would eat very little. And part of it's just that age. Like part of it's you're skinny just because you're really young, you're like a teenager, so a lot of teenagers, particularly back then, I think the diets in the world have gotten worse and worse, but back then, like, everybody was skinny when you were a teenager, right? So and the look wasn't totally emaciated, but I say that, and when Gerald Murray looked at my book before he said the yes that got me his representation, there was a picture of me in a bathing suit in this the portfolio I had, and he said, "Is that you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course it's me. Who else would it be?" And he said, "Are you that skinny?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh, you work all the time in Paris." So there was a lot of pressure to be thin, and but the girls who did the runway, particularly, they were very skinny, tall and skinny. And back when I started modeling, doing the runway, doing the shows, it was not prestigious. There was like the runway girls, and they did runway. So that all sort of changed, like sort of in the late 80s. And, when models who would do the magazines would suddenly started doing the runway. And that's when I did a little bit of runway as well at that point. But in the beginning, my agent wouldn't even send me out to do any. So I used to do the collections, but I would shoot for the magazines, and the garments would be paraded on the runways during the day, and then they'd arrive at the studios in the evening. And usually it was like set up at the Grand Hotel or something like that. We'd have ballrooms set up, and then we would wear the clothes in the evening. So sometimes I was going into hair and makeup at 11 p.m. and we'd shoot till 3 or 4 in the morning. And then the clothes would be sent back. So yeah, it was it's just an interesting profession. But there are a lot of lanes. Like, you can model, you can do just commercial stuff, which is more like everyday people, where you're just representing, like soaps and things like that, But then there's fashion, and there's high fashion, and I did a lot of high fashion. I did haute couture as well. So yeah, but I think, if you find your niche and you're happy and you're working and you can deal with the industry, good for you.
And speaking of the industry, you've got a few people asking how the male models were treated.
Okay. So the male models, for the most part, it was really rough for them. It was really rough because there wasn't a lot of work for male models. Like, there was just so much more work for females. So women's fashion was big, and there were designers who designed for men, but it was a very small part of the market compared to how much work there was for women. So and then I think they were hounded a lot. I think there was a lot of gay men in the industry who would always hit on the gay models, on male models. And that's fine if people, adults want to do what they want to do. But if you're a straight guy, and I knew some straight guys in the industry, and they always said that they really struggled with that. That was hard for them. And often, men would do a job, and sometimes they would just be like, an accessory to the woman. And they'd always joke about that too, that, oh yeah, I'm just, I'm here for just in a supportive role, and instead of being like the main person in the photo, but we're both getting paid. So, and I don't think actually they made as much money either as the women. So I think it was really hard to be a male model, frankly.
Amy's asking if you ever met Trump.
I did, actually. I did meet Trump. I met him in the 90s at a party on Fifth Avenue, at a spree. And I was at university at the time, back at school, and a girlfriend of mine who I'd worked with, because I was kind of doing a little bit of modeling during university. I was doing TV commercials and that kind of commercial print stuff, but I kind of don't include that as part of my career, but it was, obviously. But anyway, she was lovely. Kim was her name, and she invited me to this party, and we walked in, and it was lovely. They were giving away an Esprit. Esprit's a luxury brand. I think it's actually British, Shaun. And they were giving away something from the shop. Like it was either a necklace or a bag or something. And what they were asking the women who were there was to kiss a napkin and to put like a cocktail napkin. And then they were going to put them all up on the wall. And then a special guest was coming, and he was going to judge whose lip was the best, and then they'd get the prize. I know. You can't make this stuff up, right? So I was like, I told Kim, I'm not going to do that. She's like, yes, you are, girlfriend. You know, like she really wanted to get. She goes, I'll take it if you don't take it, but we're doing it. So I was like, okay. So we did it, and then who was the judge? But Donald, and yeah, he actually was around me, and I did say hello to him, but. I didn't, didn't really want to say much to him, or I had been in New York for a long time, and, knew about him and his ways, and he wasn't, wasn't someone I really wanted to talk to that much. So I sort of backed away and didn't connect with him at all.
You're getting asked whether you paint. Do you have creative interest? The painting in the background looks lovely. Do you paint?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this painting is from an artist here in Australia. She's at along one of the beaches that we always go to, and she does these beautiful, very large pieces. Funny you ask, but yeah, I do paint. Like before I decided to go back to school and be a therapist, I got into painting, and I love it. I just really enjoy it, but I haven't done it in years. I actually considered just being a painter, but I didn't want to be a starving artist. I was like, no, it's not for me. I need to, I wanted something really stable after modeling too, because, it was a kind, like you were always only as good as your last booking kind of thing. So there was always this pressure. And I just wanted something that was really stable, and something that I knew that, if I did something, I'd get something back, right? And it wasn't subjective, because in fashion, like, who gets the job? I don't know, like a bunch of creatives decide, okay, we're going to give it to you. It has not much to do with, any specific talent you might have, So I wanted, and when I was back at school, like I loved the fact, like I loved being at Columbia. I loved the fact that, I would write a paper, or I'd take a test and I'd get a grade. And it was like, according to the effort that I put in, it was like, because you don't have that in the arts a lot of times. Like you could be a really fabulous artist, let's say, but you might not, get a break because, because it's so subjective, really.
James wants to know, does seeing a therapist really work, reliving trauma over and over again? I think if you get a good one that you have good chemistry with, and they know what they're doing, it does work. It worked for me.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, Shaun. Yeah, look, therapy is a wonderful thing to do. And I don't know if you're really reliving your trauma over and over again. When I work with clients, it's really about processing the trauma, which is different than reliving it. So when you process it, the whole goal is to get it out, to sort of like, because it's sort of buried or hidden, and it's things that you haven't sort of dealt with. And it's the bringing it out so that you can then let it go and have this healing process that happens. So that's always the goal. The goal is never just to, relive things that have happened to you, because that's just a cycle that no one would want to be in. But I would encourage you, if you haven't tried it or been, that it can be very, very helpful. And like Shaun says, if you have good chemistry with someone, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, and if you review your past and learn the patterns that have led to your mistakes, then you can better avoid them in the future. All right, Laurie,
right.
We have done almost 2 hours. Huge thank you for spending this much time with us.
Oh, no worries. Thank you, Shaun.
Is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion to the viewers?
I just wanted to, I just wanted to thank you, and thank you for being someone who champions survivors, and who listens, and who lets people tell their stories, because I think that's really important, and I think you have a really lovely way about you. So yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to come on.
It's been absolutely fascinating. And all of Laurie's links are in the description box if you're watching on replay, the book. And if you want to
Men
follow
and Me
Laurie,
Too.
yeah, check all that out.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Please do.
All right.
Check out Men and Me Too. Thanks so much, Shaun. You take care.
All right. You take care. I'll let you go and close the show. Cheers. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks. Thank you for all of your questions, viewers. That was excellent. And we've got Ronnie's back tonight with Gary Waterman, the ex-cop, at 7 p.m. And then I'm back tomorrow with Ryan Dawson at 1 p.m. on Virginia's book, which we've been talking about today, as well as more exposure of the elites and Epstein. And then Lauren is back at 7 p.m. with Jonathan Hay. Again, I think this is Jonathan Hay's part 4, exposing witchcraft and Satanism in Hollywood. Yes. So huge thank you for tuning in. Hope to see some of you in the next few streams, and take care wherever you are in the world.